Dr. Han Soo-jin stared at the message on her computer screen. Her hand shook as she read it again. After 5 years of tests and training, she had been chosen to lead the first permanent Mars colony. 200 people would look to her for guidance on the Red Planet. She looked out of her office window at the busy streets of Seoul. Soon, she would leave Earth behind. The thought made her stomach turn, but she smiled anyway. This was her dream since she was a little girl looking up at the stars. The door opened, and Commander Park Ji-ho walked in. He was tall and had a serious face, but his eyes were kind. "Dr. Han," he said, "are you ready for tomorrow's announcement?" Soo-jin stood up and smoothed her lab coat. "Yes, Commander. But I worry about how the other team members will react when they learn I'm leading the science team." Ji-ho shook his head. "You earned this position. Your work on making Mars soil safe for growing food is the reason we can even try living there." Soo-jin walked to the wall where her degrees hung. She remembered all the nights she spent studying, all the failed experiments, and all the people who said she was too young for such big responsibilities. Now, at 32, she would help write humanity's next chapter. "Have you seen the final list?" she asked. Ji-ho pulled out his tablet. "Yes, we have engineers, doctors, farmers, and builders. Some are bringing their families. The youngest is 6 years old. The oldest is 60. Soo-jin's eyes widened. "Children. On Mars. We're not just building a base," Ji-ho explained. "We're building a home. A new world. We need families, not just workers." Just then, Soo-jin's phone buzzed. It was time for the medical checkup. Every future colonist needed to be in perfect health. The doctors would look at their bones, hearts, and minds. Living on Mars would be hard on the body and spirit. As they walked to the medical center, they passed the giant spaceship being built at the spaceport. The New Dawn was huge, like a floating city. It would carry them all to Mars, along with their hopes and dreams. Inside the medical center, Soo-jin saw other chosen colonists. There was Kim Ta-won, the engineer who designed the Mars homes. Lee Min-ah, who would guide their landing on Mars, was getting her blood pressure checked. Choi Young-ma, the farming expert, smiled and waved from behind a glass wall where doctors were testing her lungs. "Look at them all," Ji-ho said quietly. 200 people from different backgrounds, all ready to risk everything for this mission. Soo-jin watched as a young mother helped her child put on a hospital gown. "They're all so brave," she said. Later that night, Soo-jin sat in her apartment, looking at pictures of Mars. The red planet looked empty and cold in the photos, but soon it would be home. She thought about all the challenges ahead. The 8-month journey through space, building the colony, growing food in Mars soil, and keeping everyone safe and healthy. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "I saw the news," her mother said. "My daughter, going to Mars." Her voice shook with emotion. "I'll be fine, Mom," Soo-jin said, but she felt tears in her eyes too. "We can still talk through video calls. It just takes 20 minutes for messages to travel between Earth and Mars." "I'm not crying because I'm sad," her mother said. "I'm crying because I'm proud. My little girl who always looked at the stars is going to live among them." After the call, Soo-jin packed her most important belongings. She could only take 2 small bags to Mars. In one, she put family photos, her favorite books, and her father's old watch. In the other, she packed clothes and personal items. Tomorrow, the world would know their names. The news would call them heroes, pioneers, and adventurers. But tonight, they were just people, getting ready for the biggest change of their lives. Soo-jin looked at the night sky one last time. Somewhere up there, Mars was waiting. In 1 year, it wouldn't just be a bright red dot in the sky. It would be home. 3 months into their journey to Mars, Chief Engineer Kim Ta-won floated through the quiet halls of the New Dawn spaceship. The gentle hum of machines kept him company as he did his nightly checks. Everything looked normal on his tablet, but something felt wrong. After 15 years of working with machines, He had learned to trust his feelings. He pushed himself toward the life support control room. The artificial gravity was turned off to save power, so everyone had to float or use the handrails to move around. Some people still got sick from floating, but most had gotten used to it. Taiwan found Dr. Han Sujin already in the control room, looking at screens full of numbers and graphs. She didn't look happy. "You feel it too?" he asked. Sujin nodded. "The oxygen levels in Section C are dropping. Very slowly, but they're dropping." Taiwan pulled himself to the main computer. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard as he checked all the systems. After 20 minutes, he found the problem. A small crack was letting oxygen leak into space. It was hidden behind a panel where no one could see it. "We need to tell Commander Park," Sujin said, reaching for the communication panel. Soon, Commander Park Ji-ho called an emergency meeting in the ship's main hall. 200 people gathered, floating in groups, their faces worried under the bright lights. "We have found a crack in our oxygen system," Ji-ho announced. "We can fix it, but we need to seal off Section C for 2 days. 50 people will need to move to other rooms." The colonists looked at each other. They knew the dangers of space travel. One small problem could become big very quickly. Taiwan stood up next. "I need 5 volunteers to help with repairs. It will be dangerous work. We'll have to go into Section C wearing spacesuits." Hands went up immediately. The colonists knew their lives depended on working together. Lee Minna, the flight director, was one of the first volunteers. She knew the ship's layout better than anyone. For the next 2 days, Ta-Won and his team worked in the cold, empty Section C. They wore heavy spacesuits and carried tools that had been specially made for space. The crack was small, but fixing it was hard. They had to cut out the damaged part and weld in a new piece of metal. While they worked, the rest of the colonists tried to stay calm. In the temporary sleeping areas, parents told their children stories about Mars to keep them from being scared. Choi Young-me, the farming expert, gave extra lessons about growing plants to keep people's minds busy. Sujin spent hours checking the ship's other systems. She didn't want any more surprises. Sometimes she looked out the windows at the stars. Earth was now just a small blue dot behind them. Mars was a growing red dot ahead. Finally, after 2 long days, Taiwan's team finished the repairs. The oxygen levels returned to normal, and people moved back to their rooms. That night, Commander Park called everyone together again. "Today we learned something important," he said. "Space is dangerous, but we are stronger together. Each person here is valuable. Each person here is brave." Sujin looked around at the faces of her fellow colonists. They had passed their first big test, but she knew there would be more challenges ahead. Space was beautiful but harsh. It didn't forgive mistakes. That night, many colonists had trouble sleeping. The sound of the repaired oxygen system reminded them how fragile their lives were. But it also reminded them how far they had come. They were halfway to Mars now, floating in the darkness between 2 worlds. In his room, Taiwan made a new checklist. He would check every system twice as often now. On his desk was a photo of his grandmother, who had told him stories about crossing the ocean to find a better life. "Now I'm crossing the stars, grandmother," he whispered, touching the photo. "But like you said, it's not about the journey. It's about building something new when we get there." Flight Director Lee Minna sat at her control station, her eyes fixed on the screen showing Mars growing larger. After 8 months in space, they were finally here. But something was wrong. The weather sensors were showing dangerous readings. "Commander Park," she called out, "a dust storm is coming. It's bigger than anything we planned for." Commander Park Ji-ho moved quickly to her station. The screen showed a massive red cloud moving toward their landing site. They had only 1 hour before it would hit. "We have 2 choices," Minna explained. "We can stay in orbit and wait for the storm to pass, or we can try to land before it arrives. But if we wait, we'll use up too much fuel." The commander's face was serious. "How sure are you that we can land in time?" 50-50, Minna answered honestly. But we trained for this. The whole crew knows what to do. Commander Park called Dr. Han Soo-jin to join them. As colony leader, she needed to help make this decision. Soo-jin looked at the storm data and nodded. We have to try landing now. The colony supplies can't stay in space much longer. The commander made his decision. His voice came through everyone's speakers. All colonists, prepare for emergency landing. This is not a drill. Get to your landing positions immediately. The ship became busy with activity. Parents helped children into special seats. Engineers checked landing systems. Medical staff prepared for possible injuries. Everyone knew their job. Minna's fingers moved quickly over her controls. She had landed thousands of times in simulators. But this was different. Real lives depended on her now. First landing ship, ready for release, she announced. The colony was too big to land in one piece. They would land in 5 separate ships. The first ship broke away from the main vessel. Minna guided it carefully through Mars' thin atmosphere. The ship shook hard, but her hand stayed steady. Red dust was already starting to blow around them. Landing gear down, she called. 30 seconds to touchdown. Everyone held their breath. The storm was getting closer. Through the windows, they could see red clouds approaching like a giant wall. The first ship landed with a strong bump. Cheers filled the control room, but Minna had no time to celebrate. She was already preparing the second ship. One by one, the ships landed. Each landing was harder than the last as the storm got closer. The wind threw red dust against their windows. The last ship carried their most important supplies and equipment. Storm is here, someone shouted. The wind was now strong enough to move small rocks. Minna could barely see the landing site through the dust. She took a deep breath and focused. The last ship needed to land perfectly, or they would lose vital supplies. Her screen showed wind speed, altitude, and hundreds of other numbers. She adjusted for each change in the wind. The final landing was rough. The ship bounced once, then settled onto Mars' surface. As soon as it was down, automatic systems began securing it against the storm. Minna finally let herself relax. Her hands were shaking, but she smiled. They had made it. Hours later, when the storm passed, the colonists got their first real look at their new home. The landscape was completely red. Red rocks, red sand, red sky. Their 5 ships sat in a circle, just as planned. Dr. Han Soo-jin put on her pressure suit. As colony leader, she would take the first step. The airlock door opened slowly. She stepped down the ladder and placed her boot on the red soil. This is no longer just Mars, she said, her voice carried to everyone through their radio links. This is our new home. Behind her, 200 people waited for their turn to step onto Mars. They had ships full of supplies, years of training, and each other. They would need it all to survive on this beautiful but dangerous world. 1 month after landing, the Mars colony was starting to take shape. Large machines moved across the red ground, laying foundations for the main dome. Inside the temporary shelters, Agricultural Director Choi Young-mai worked in her test garden. She carefully checked each plant growing in the special containers. The tomatoes are growing well, she told Dr. Han Soo-jin, who had come to check on the progress. But the lettuce is having problems. Something in the Mars soil is making it sick. Soo-jin looked at the weak lettuce plants. Even after cleaning and treating the soil, Mars was fighting back against their efforts to grow Earth plants. They had food stored from Earth, but they needed to grow their own soon. Outside, construction teams worked on the main dome. They called it Hope Haven, and it would be their real home once finished. The dome would be huge, big enough to hold houses, gardens, and even a small park. But building it was dangerous work. Chief Engineer Kim Ta-won supervised the construction robots from his control room. The robots did the heaviest work, but people in pressure suits had to check everything. Every piece had to be perfect. One small crack in the dome could let out all their air. Section 5 is complete. Ta 1 reported through the radio. Moving to Section 6. The colony worked in 3 shifts so building could continue day and night. They had to finish before their supplies from the landing ships ran low. Commander Park watched the progress from the command center, marking off each completed section on his maps. Young Mei spent her free time teaching the colonists about plants. Everyone would need to help with farming once the main gardens were built. She showed them how to test soil, plant seeds, and care for growing plants. Each plant is precious, she explained to a group of children. They clean our air, give us food, and make this feel more like Earth. But Mars was dangerous, and they learned this the hard way. During the construction of Section 7, something went wrong. A support beam wasn't placed correctly. Worker Shin Minho noticed the problem and rushed to warn others. But the beam fell. He pushed another worker to safety, but couldn't save himself. The colony had its first funeral. They couldn't bury him in the Mars soil, so they built a special memorial instead. Commander Park spoke about Minho's bravery. The colony held a day of mourning, but they had to continue working. Their survival depended on finishing the dome. Young Mi honored Minho by naming a new garden section after him. He died helping build our home, she said. Now his name will live on in the place where we grow life. The accident made everyone more careful, but it also brought them closer together. People worked harder. Those who weren't building helped in other ways, cooking meals, maintaining equipment, or caring for children. Everyone understood that they had to support each other to survive. 3 months after landing, the main dome was finally finished. The colonists gathered to watch as the air systems started working. Slowly, the huge space filled with breathable air. After all the safety checks were complete, they were allowed to enter without pressure suits for the first time. Young Mi cried when she walked into her new main garden area. The space was huge, with long rows ready for planting. Special lights hung from the ceiling to help the plants grow. She planted the first seed, a tomato plant, in the center of the garden. "This is where it really begins," Su Jin said, watching the planting ceremony. "Now we start building not just a base, but a true home." That night, the colonists slept in the dome for the first time. The lights of Hope Haven glowed on the Martian surface, a bright bubble of life on the red planet. They had faced death, hardship, and loss, but they had also created something amazing. The first human city on another world. Science officer Kang Do-hyun carefully moved his drill into the red rock. He was exploring a deep canyon 3 kilometers from Hope Haven. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Martian landscape, and his breath made small clouds inside his helmet. Just another routine sample, he said to himself. He had collected hundreds of rock samples over the past 4 months. But today would be different. As he pulled the drill out, something unusual caught his eye. The rock core had strange dark lines in it. He had never seen patterns like these before in Martian rocks. His heart began to beat faster. "Base, this is Kang," he called through his radio. "I need Dr. Han to see something. It's different." Back at the colony, Dr. Han Soo-jin was working in her laboratory when she received his call. She quickly put on her pressure suit and drove the electric rover to Do-hyun's location. The rover kicked up red dust as it moved across the Martian surface. When she arrived, Do-hyun showed her the rock sample. Soo-jin's hands trembled as she held it. After 15 years of studying Mars rocks, she knew this was special. "We need to get this to the lab immediately," she said. Her voice was calm, but Do-hyun could see the excitement in her eyes through her helmet visor. In the laboratory, they used their most powerful microscope to study the sample. Other scientists gathered around as images appeared on the screen. The dark lines in the rock weren't just random patterns. They were fossilized remains of tiny organisms that had lived on Mars billions of years ago. "It's life," Soo-jin whispered. "We've found evidence of ancient life on Mars." Commander Park was called to the laboratory. He looked at the images for a long time before speaking. "We need to be absolutely sure before we tell Earth," he said. "Run every test possible. For the next week, the science team worked day and night. They checked and double-checked their findings. They used different machines to study the fossils. Each test confirmed what they had found, proof that Mars once had living things. When they were completely sure, they sent their report to Earth. It would take 20 minutes for the message to reach home. The scientists waited nervously for a response. The reply from Earth came 2 hours later. Scientists there were excited but cautious. They asked many questions and requested more tests. The discovery would change how humans thought about life in the universe. But the discovery also created new problems. Some areas of Mars might still have tiny living things. The colony had to be very careful not to harm any possible life that might still exist. "We came here to build a new home," Sujin told the colony during a meeting. "But now we know we're not just builders. We're guardians too. We must protect Mars's history and any life that might still be here." New rules were made. Before digging or building in new areas, scientists had to check for signs of life. Some places were marked as protected zones where no one could build. Do-hyun spent many hours studying the fossils. He made detailed drawings and took many pictures. At night, he looked out his window at the Martian landscape. He thought about how this empty-looking planet had once been home to living things. Now, after billions of years, life had returned to Mars. But this time, it had arrived from Earth. The discovery changed how the colonists saw their new home. Mars wasn't just a dead planet they were bringing life to. It was a world that had its own story, its own history of life. They were not the first living things here, just the newest chapter in Mars's long story. Colony Security Chief Yoon Jae-yun stood at the control room window, watching the sky turn dark red. The storm that their weather systems had detected was coming faster than expected. In her 15 years of studying Mars weather, she had never seen anything like this. "All colonists must return to the main dome immediately," she announced through the colony's speaker system. Her voice was steady, though her hands were shaking. "This is not a drill. The biggest storm we have ever seen is approaching." Outside, people in pressure suits hurried to get back to Hope Haven. The wind was already strong enough to throw small rocks through the air. Chief Engineer Kim Ta-won directed his maintenance teams to secure all outside equipment. "Wind speed is reaching 300 kilometers per hour, someone called out. That was twice as strong as the worst storms they had planned for. Commander Park arrived at the control room. "How long will it last?" he asked Jae-yun. "The computers say at least 5 days," she replied. "Maybe longer, and that's not our only problem." She pointed to the dome's sensor readings. The extreme pressure from the storm was putting huge stress on the dome's walls. They had built Hope Haven to be strong, but every structure had its limits. As the storm grew stronger, the first warning alarms started to sound. A small crack had appeared in one of the dome's upper panels. "If that crack grows, we could lose dome pressure," Ta-won said, studying the damage reports. "We need to fix it now, before the storm gets worse." But going outside now was extremely dangerous. The storm could easily pick up a person and throw them away. Still, they had no choice. If the dome broke, everyone would die. Ta-won picked his best repair team. They put on their strongest pressure suits and extra safety lines. Dr. Han Soo-jin watched from the control room as 5 people stepped into the airlock. The repair team fought against the wind. Red dust covered everything, making it hard to see. They had to crawl along the dome's surface, holding onto safety rails. One wrong move could mean death. Inside the dome, things were getting worse. More cracks were appearing. The colonists gathered in the central shelter area. Parents tried to keep their children calm by reading stories and playing games. But everyone could hear the storm's roar and the dome's creaking sounds. The repair team worked for 3 hours in the terrible storm. They sealed the cracks with special material designed for Mars repairs. But as soon as they fixed one crack, another would appear. "We need a better solution," Jae-yun said. "The storm is still getting stronger." Soo-jin had an idea. "What if we reduce the air pressure inside the dome? just a little. It would put less stress on the walls. It was risky. Lower air pressure would make it harder to breathe, but it might save the dome from breaking. Commander Park made the decision to try it. The next few days were hard. People got headaches from the lower air pressure. The storm's noise made it difficult to sleep. The dome continued to creak and groan, but no new cracks appeared. On the sixth day, the storm finally began to weaken. When it was over, they found the outside of Hope Haven covered in new dents and scratches. Their gardens were safe inside, but all their outside sensors and small structures were destroyed. "We survived," Jae-yun said, looking at the damage. "But we need to make the dome stronger. This won't be the last big storm." The crisis changed how they thought about living on Mars. The planet was reminding them that it could still be deadly, even after 18 months of successful colonization. They would need to adapt and build stronger defenses if they wanted to stay. The message from Earth brought bad news. The next supply ship would be delayed by 6 months due to problems with its engines. Dr. Han Soo-jin called an emergency meeting in Hope Haven's main hall. "We have enough food for 3 months," she explained to the worried colonists. "After that, we must produce everything we need here on Mars." Her voice was calm, but everyone understood the danger. If they failed, they would starve. Chief Engineer Kim Ta-won stood up next. "Our recycling systems are working well, but they're using too much power. We need better ways to save energy." Agricultural Director Choi Young-mi shared her own concerns. "Only half our crops are growing properly. The Mars soil is still too toxic for many plants." The colony faced their biggest challenge yet. They had to solve these problems quickly, or it wouldn't survive. Commander Park divided everyone into teams. Each team would work on a different problem. Soo-jin led the soil team. They worked in the science laboratory day and night, testing new ways to clean the Mars soil. After many failed attempts, she noticed something interesting. Some Mars bacteria they had discovered could help clean the soil. These tiny life forms evolved to live in Mars soil, she explained to her team. Maybe they can help Earth plants grow here too. They carefully mixed the Mars bacteria with their garden soil. At first, nothing seemed different. But after 2 weeks, the test plants began growing better than ever before. The bacteria were making the soil safer for Earth plants. Meanwhile, Taiwan worked on the power problem. He watched how dust storms covered their solar panels with red dirt, making them less effective. Then he remembered how the wind had moved during the big storm. "What if we use the wind to clean the panels?" he suggested. His team designed special tilting panels that could shake off dust using the Mars winds. They also created small cleaning robots that crawled across the panels at night, keeping them clear. Young-mi made another breakthrough in the gardens. She discovered that certain plants grew better when planted together. She created new farming plans, mixing different types of plants to help them survive. She called it the Earth-Mars Garden System. The colony's children helped too. During their science classes, they found that worms from Earth could live in the treated Mars soil. The worms helped make the soil even better for plants. Soon, they had a worm farm providing helpers for all their gardens. As their food production improved, Taiwan's team created better recycling systems. They found ways to reuse almost everything. Even the children's old clothes were turned into growing mats for small plants. "Every problem has forced us to become smarter," Soo-jin told the colony during their weekly meeting. "We're not just surviving on Mars anymore. We're learning to truly live here." 3 months later, the gardens were producing more food than ever before. The solar panels worked better than new ones on Earth. Their recycling systems used half the power they had before. The colony was no longer just a base on Mars. It was becoming a real civilization. When the supply ship finally arrived, the colony had a surprise for Earth. Instead of just receiving supplies, they sent back their first export, Mars-grown tomatoes. They were small, but they represented something huge. The colony could now feed itself. "We didn't just solve our problems," Commander Park said as they shared the first Mars-grown feast. We found better ways to live. These solutions will help people on Earth too. That night, Su-Jin wrote in her diary, "Today marks a new chapter in human history. We're no longer just visitors on Mars. We're becoming true Martians." 5 years had passed since the first landing on Mars. Hope Haven had grown into a true city under its massive dome. Gardens filled with green plants lined the streets, and small houses formed neat rows. The air was clean, and the soil grew food well. But today was special for a different reason. In the medical center, Dr. Han Su-Jin stood with Commander Park Ji-ho, waiting outside the delivery room. Inside, the colony's doctors were helping with the birth of the first human baby to be born on Mars. "I never thought I'd see this day," Su-Jin said softly. "When we first landed, we were just trying to survive. Now we're bringing new life into our Mars world." The baby's parents were Lee Min-ah, their former flight director, and Kim Ta-won, the chief engineer. They had fallen in love while working together during the colony's hardest times. Their baby would be the first true Martian. After several hours, they heard a baby's cry. The sound echoed through Hope Haven's halls, and people stopped their work to listen. This cry meant something amazing. Humans could not just survive on Mars, but truly live here. The baby was a healthy girl. They named her Kim Hwa-ya, which meant becoming flowers. Like the gardens that now bloomed in Mars soil, she represented new life growing in this once empty world. News of Hwa-ya's birth traveled quickly to Earth. Scientists there had many questions. How would a baby born in Mars' lower gravity develop? Would she be different from Earth children? Only time would tell, but the colony's doctors watched her carefully and found she was growing well. The birth made everyone think about the future. Commander Park called a meeting to discuss their plans. "The second wave of colonists will arrive in 6 months," he announced. 200 more people are coming to join us. We need to be ready." The colony had changed much in 5 years. They had built a second dome, connected to Hope Haven by covered walkways. New gardens produced more food than they needed. Their recycling systems worked perfectly. They even had a small factory that made replacement parts for their equipment. But the biggest change was in the people. They no longer felt like visitors on Mars. This was their home. Children born on Earth now spoke about Mars as their planet. They played in special parks under the dome and learned about both Earth and Mars in their school. One evening, Su-Jin found young Hwa-ya's parents watching their daughter sleep. "She will never know Earth," Min-ah said. "To her, the red planet will be normal. Living under a dome will be natural." Ta-won smiled. "But she will help build humanity's future here. Maybe she will design better domes or find new ways to use Mars' resources. She is the first of a new kind of human, a true Martian." The colony prepared for the new arrivals. They built more houses and expanded their gardens. They improved their emergency systems and made their domes stronger. The first 5 years had taught them many lessons, and they were ready to teach others. Commander Park stood with Su-Jin, looking out at the Martian sunset through the dome's clear walls. The sky was pink and red, and dust storms glowed in the distance. But they were no longer afraid of Mars' dangers. They had learned to live with them. "We did what we came to do," Su-Jin said. "We didn't just build a base. We built a new world for humanity. And now, with Hwa-ya's birth, we know our future here is real." The commander nodded. "This is just the beginning," he said. "One day, there will be many cities on Mars. But Hope Haven will always be remembered as the place where humans first made Mars their true home."